protections in place.
Right, so there's definitely a desire to be prepared. But let's get down into some of the nitty gritty. So Susan, you had mentioned the framework, the cybersecurity framework for the restaurant industry that you headed for the association. Could you talk to us a little bit about what the 5 categories are of the cyber, and I'm here as a call a friend.
Call a friend. Assistance. I'm not going to quote them off the top of my head, but I will tell you that on the restaurant.org/cybersecurity, they're all there. The most important thing about the cybersecurity framework is people that were like me and Charlie sat in a room, IT people, and thought about what are the most important things to restaurants and what examples can we give to a restaurant so that it would seem real or real life. So it's a cybersecurity framework that was done by an excellent organization, but we try to make it more for restaurants, and we actually did it with a smaller operator in mind so everybody could identify with it. And by looking at the framework, there's actually a methodology you go through where you actually just create a plan for yourself. You can't compete on security with Charlie. Charlie's got Charlie money over there on security. And we know you don't. So you have to look at where you go and you look at the opportunities for you to get better. So anywhere from identifying problems, protecting yourself, how to detect problems, what to do after the fact for recovery, and all those steps that you go through it. It lets you know all the things you might need so that at the very least you have something in all 5 categories that you're doing actively well, and you're getting more, security is a continuum. There is no perfect security, you're always getting better, so you're just pushing yourself along that continuum.
But this framework is different from the payment card industry, the PCI data security standard. Charlie, could you tell us a little bit about the role that PCI plays in this space?
Sure. Well, obviously, I think probably everyone in the room who has a business understands that if they take credit card information, they're obliged to comply with certain regulations around this. And even if you think you're out of scope, there's still a considerable amount of documentation and review to ensure that your systems and your processes and policies are in place to protect data. PCI is, while it's pretty comprehensive, it is not the thing, though. It is not the boundary of where security begins and ends. It is an important component to it, and moreover, if you are engaged and sort of actively involved in that PCI process, you're going to cover a lot of the areas, but it might, you might end up focusing only on certain areas that are, you may over-index just on the payment space, but you have to realize that it goes well beyond that too.
Great, but there are, we've had PCI for several years now, and yet we still continue to have these payment card breaches, and that's what the headlines by and large have, with the exception of what has happened on Facebook with Cambridge Analytica, and we'll get to that in a moment. So I wanted, you started to talk a little bit about the issues with the PCI approach. I wondered from a single operator perspective, if you could walk me through some of the more issues that PCI has.
Sure. Well, first one, there's 60,000 issues, which is roughly the cost. $60,000 is roughly the cost of a breach, for a small business. And so, right there, that's a significant incentive. Really, PCI is around ensuring that you're limiting and have awareness of who has access to your systems, that the systems are protected from unwanted or unauthorized access, and that they're essentially locked down, from an accessibility protection, an accessibility perspective. Similarly, when the data is in transit, and making sure that it's protected, as well as when it's at rest, so that no one can pick that up, and sort of a continuous review and monitoring of your systems too, because it isn't just a question of, okay, I put something in place. It's an active engagement and monitoring of those systems so that you're aware when you do have issues.
Great, and so PCI, it just covers the credit card information, but as we started off talking, there's so much more data that restaurants collect. So where do restaurants start to protect that other data? What other sort of tactics are out there to protect employee data, IP, supply chain, and what have you?
Well, in my space particularly, with the digital guest-facing technology, there are a whole bunch of standards even when it comes to just developing your websites and your digital content, ensuring that you're following proper development standards and practices to ensure that people aren't hacking your website or just defacing it or eliminating access to it. But it doesn't even have to be high-end tech engineering protections. It can be as fundamental as just protecting passwords. If you're a food truck who wants to tweet your location, if that Twitter handle's password's compromised, you lose business. From a PCI perspective, then there is a security perspective. There's data that you're protecting all across your business. Some of it's data coming in, but it's also the data you use to run it. Passwords, access, knowing who has access. Similarly, as you look to the future in terms of new technologies that are coming, whether it's automated systems or the Internet of Things, these are new devices that you're attaching to your network. You have to make sure they're secure as well. Very often, these are products that are innovated for a new feature or function, and the network connectivity and security protections are sometimes lacking. They may all ship with default passwords. These are the sort of things that you have to be aware of as you start to attach more and more devices to your network too.
Yeah, Charlie just mentioned something that it's near and dear to my heart, which is ridiculous that it's near and dear to my heart, which is when you receive hardware out from a vendor, you have to change the passwords right away. Those passwords are on the internet, everybody can get into them. And that includes things that you don't think are going to cause you any damage, like an IoT device, which could be anything. A tablet is an IoT device, sensors, beacons that are able to get to the internet. And it's a very simple step for you to do, but you have to do it. Even your IoT devices could be used against you. It could be used against an attack on somebody else, which is going to use your bandwidth to do it, taking your telecom down in your store. So little things like that, the vendors never remind you to do it because they assume you're going to. So don't be that person. Always change your password. And make them hard passwords, not easy passwords. There's 4 White Castle people I'd have to say that.
So you were just talking about people attaching to your network. I'm sure both of you're obviously from larger brands, but tell me a little bit about how you interact with third-party services like a loyalty program or an onboarding company, people who you're contracting with. You are assigning responsibilities, roles, a service level agreement. What steps do each of your brands take to ensure that agreements like this, people who are bringing in a new service that you yourself couldn't build yourself, but they are handling your customers' data, your employees' data, what steps do you do to protect?
Well, for us, it begins even from the very beginning, built into our master service agreements. We have legal language around data protection. We also make our vendors provide really a lot of information about their security practices. So you want to make sure that if you're going to trust a vendor or going to bring a vendor into your operations, that you want to trust, but you also need to verify and ask them to provide, whether it's statements, certifications. You can get pretty detailed about what you need to know there.
I think for those of you who don't have a technology department or have a small one, even the act of asking for that information and knowing that they can provide it to you and know that they meet some natural standards will give you a level of reassurance that you should insist on getting. Do not be surprised. We've actually met and done business with people that come to contract time and they don't have a disaster recovery plan for their cloud services. So those are not things that you should take for granted. Just because they're a larger company doesn't mean they're going to have everything together. And look at your SLAs. That'll tell you a lot about the company. If they won't make a strong commitment to get you back in business in a very short period of time, that means they technically are not able to get you back in business. That means they're not the right partner.
I would also add, that, and I alluded to this before, you don't think about security after you've stood it up. It really should be one of the things that is there from the beginning. It's security is a very hard thing to bolt on after the fact or remediate when you discover that you have a gap. Far more important to take the time up front when you're planning and working with your vendors or even developing your own systems to understand, hey, what are the possible risks here? Seek out counsel, whether it's from outside experts in technology. There are folks out there who can do that for you, to give you a sense of where your applications are at risk, to scan your systems, etc. These are the sort of things that you can leverage even when you're designing, and then obviously as you verify that becomes part of your testing as you build and deploy.
Right. I mean, we're here at the show. We're surrounded over here in the Tech Pavilion with all these new innovations, these new approaches to connect with customers. But I think that's a really great insight that with all the new innovation, all the new technology that you do at the forefront, you have to ask these questions on the front end and not on the back end. I wanted to ask you guys about privacy. Along with data protection and data breaches, that privacy now is a new buzzword, and I probably should give it more regard than calling it just a buzzword. But in light of the election interference and what's going on in California, Charlie, would love for you to opine on that. Tell me a little bit about protecting thinking about privacy. I think about privacy as the other side of the data protection coin. It's not about how do you protect, but like what are you collecting, and why are you collecting, and should you be collecting, and then on the other side, how do you protect that data?
Well, privacy is more than just an opt-in or a checkbox to say yes, you can market to me. You should be able to provide upon request what data you're collecting and why, and also be able to provide some to demonstrate your capability to protect that data too. So privacy legislation, whether it's what's emerging in California or what you've seen with GDPR in Europe, this is all. It's not just about making sure that there's consent, but there's awareness of what's being collected, how it's being protected, as well as your ability to expunge that data, or pull it out upon an individual's request. So the individuals are in charge of their data. You're essentially borrowing it, but you have to be able to demonstrate you have the capability to protect it and manage it responsibly.
Yeah, I think that's where it changes a little bit on the security to privacy side. You are really, once you take in data from a customer or from any entity which you need to take that is private, you have a certain governorship of it. You have a certain obligation to that data to make sure that even if you give it to a third party yourself, that it is going to be taken care of. And then if you need to be able to retrieve that data, the customer decides in California that they don't want to be remembered, like it's not really Europe, but it's close. We have to go get that data back out again, so you have to know where everything is. And so for us, and probably your journey too, Charlie, the last couple of years has been all this data that we have, all this data that we collect, where is it at, who has access to it, how would we back it out if we had to?
Tell me about, internal to your organizations, obviously Savvy Brands, but IT and data protection, there's a bit of I call it an IT intimidation factor. How do you get your colleagues smart? If you're a single operator, how do you make yourself smart on these topics? So just wondered, tell me a little bit about addressing the challenge of the IT intimidation factor. Where do you start? How do you get that conversation going?
I think there's different ways you can do it. I mean, besides the ways that we told you on the security side, there's also the privacy side. There are some great firms out there that'll help you make your retention and your privacy and your compliance documentation much smoother. They tend to be legal forms, legal companies, not security companies, but they really can give you really good groundwork to set up a plan for yourself. I really am a big proponent of, if you're a certain size, you should probably have a managed security company as your partner. If you don't have the resources to have your own, then you need a team. You mentioned one of them before with Alienvault, who's become AT&T cybersecurity. There's people that are actually here that do it, and it's worth the money because they will help you with protection, but you still have to go out and make sure that any data partner that you deal with or any third party loyalty program is a very good one, that they're securing your customer's data. It's your responsibility as the person who invited the customer in. They don't understand that it's a third party holding their data. It's your responsibility under a lot of different state regulation coming, and definitely in California, to make sure it is being protected.
Right, a lot of talk about building business cases for services, right? But a cost of a breach for just a small operator, $60,000. But that's not for sure, though, right? So how do you convince internal audiences that this is money well spent?
Well, it's not. When it comes to breach and what's at risk, it isn't just dollars; it's reputation. I think that's something that resonates with everybody, and marketers and others too. You don't want to be in a position where you lose control of your brand narrative. And so there's obviously that, but it's very much like it's like the protections you have to put in place for health and protecting food quality too. People who run restaurants are not biologists, but they understand what it takes to make sure that you're preparing food in a sanitary fashion and that you're not introducing risk. It's the same thing. It's just a process of understanding that people can get hurt, not just the consumers, but your employees, the brands themselves. A breach costs go well beyond the fees and the penalties. It can injure a brand, and the livelihoods are at stake. That's why security professionals, the security professionals are really focused not just on protecting consumers, but really everybody who's involved with that data, because we all have a stake in its protection.
Right. So digital health equivalent to food safety, right? Anything to add?
Good job, Charlie. No, I think it's an excellent analogy. I mean, it's why we buy insurance. It's why we do the things we do, because at the end of the day, if someone calls one of your restaurants and social engineers one of your team members into giving up something very significant, you will alone lose money. You will destroy the morale of your team. That was part of it. It's very hard on them, and you will not. Look what's happened on the food safety side. You don't want to go through that. I watched our peers on the retail big box side, like Target, and the different people that went through it, and what it did to their companies, and how long it lasted, on the sales side. It's never worth the risk. So doing these basic things, you won't be that guy who the FBI showed up one day and said, or one of our peers that had months and months of lost resources and money internally to dedicate themselves into resecuring themselves because they didn't do it to begin with.
So what are the sort of things that keep you up at night at White Castle, knowing that all of your locations are company owned, right? You must have scale issues, right? There are no hackers in the room. I'm sure you're taking notes. But what's the first thing that you're worried about, Charlie? I'm going to ask you the same question when you come to work. What's really motivating you these days?
Social engineering. It's one of the things I can't do anything about as much, but train. We can do a lot to lock down email. We can do a lot to lock down our networks. We can't do a lot to lock down our people's ability to be fooled. And it worries me because our people are in the customer service business. We're in hospitality. We want to be good to the people that call on the phone. It is not in our nature to be distrustful of people that call or emails. That worries me a lot because we've seen a lot more of it now. If you looked at the last Verizon report, the incidence of success rates are going up higher in that category. So if the successes are going up higher, then it's going to start happening more often. Obviously, the email version of it happens a lot to a lot of business, but for us, it's not all of our team members have access to email all the time. We're not sitting in front of it all the time, especially in our restaurants. It's more likely to be on the phone still. And that's what worries me because that's a lot of people that you have to keep on the same page.
And Charlie, I know you work a lot on digital commerce, customer-facing technology. Tell me about what's life like on the internet now and data security.
Sure. Well, I would say the thing that scares me the most actually is just getting that phone call from our CSO so she scares me. But I'm scared about, or I worry about a number of things. I would say first and foremost, my primary concern is around just availability of our systems. We are knocking down brute force attacks all the time. We have distributed denial of service attacks that we're knocking down, but also we are seeing folks trying to brute force just email address and password combinations to get into our sites. And very often this is a technique used by hackers just to identify good email address and password pairs. They may not really care about hacking into your IHOP account, but what they really want to know is that I bet that CH Jones at Yahoo uses the same password for his bank. And so they'll immediately try to sell or use that data to access other systems too. So first and foremost, I'm worried about availability, and I mitigate that through our own monitoring systems, as well as having some great partners who help and watch our environment for us. But then secondarily, we have other systems and programming in place that just says, okay, if you're trying to brute force your way in, you're not supposed to be here. But still, we see that happening, and so these are the things that keep me awake at least. Is who's watching? Is someone has to keep watching, even if you think you have systems in place. Who's watching, and is everything available too? Because the last thing I want is to have a consumer want to buy from us and be unable to because the system is struggling because it's under attack.
Great. Why don't we tell me one piece of advice that you would give a smaller operator where they are set up, they're growing. Where would you tell them to put their resources?
I would definitely have point-to-point encryption for sure. I hope you all have that now as a smaller operator. And then I would still invest in a managed service. Even at a lower level managed service cybersecurity company, they can scale down to what you have to have. They don't have to be this big thing that sends you alerts at night, but they keep an eye on the door for you. And if you talk to them, you talk about how big you are, talk about can you give value to me, they will work with you. So I still advise that as a really important step. You can outgrow them someday, be bigger and have to move up to a different company, or maybe decide to insource it yourself. But I would definitely start there. Okay.
And I would just add education. You can always train your employees around, hey, don't attach that thumb drive to the back of house server. Things like that just to get some fundamentals down, because there are just some things that people do. They charge their devices off the USB drive. So these are things that you can start to educate your teams on around how you can just maintain sort of a fundamental sort of awareness of hygiene, password protection, connecting devices, sharing information, sharing accounts, making sure you deactivate old accounts. That sort of the routine maintenance is really, really crucial.
I want to add to something you said too. For a smaller person or a smaller one chain, it's important that your people know what's going to happen in your stores, so they know you're always going to let them know if a telecom provider is coming in, or if there's a person coming in to replace something, because some pretty major retail brands have had people posing as credit card device companies come in and change out their credit card devices, or they're a telecom company and they've come back and put breaching type tools in their back office because they just said and they have a cap on and they look official. So if your people believe you would just let any random person come in without telling them, they're going to let any random person in the door. So you got to make sure you set up a really good visitor policy so they know what's happening all the time.
Tell me about, and this will be our last question, but tell me about the future of data protection. What do you think that looks like?
I'm excited. I really look forward to AI and data protection as being the perfect fit. I know AI is, everybody out there saying something about AI, but AI and behavior learning for your business is going to be fantastic. And people behave in normal ways, machines behave in normal ways, things happen, data goes in certain ways in your network. And having something constantly looking for abnormalities and learning about your environment is going to be the thing that stops having to have people chase all the false positives around in bigger teams, but also helps a littler company know what to look for because they wouldn't have time to go through all those false positives. So I think that's an exciting thing that's happening. There's companies right out there selling. They're selling expensively, but they're selling, and they'll come down eventually.
Yeah, I'd agree that AI, because what it does is the services that are out there don't just have to learn from your own systems, but they're applying heuristics that they learn across the industry. So I also think, though, that as we start seeing other changes, for example, as we move more and more technology to the cloud, and technology becomes more increasingly really just software and abstractions, and infrastructure is no longer really a box somewhere, but just a configuration of some file on a server at Amazon. I believe that's going to also make, introduce new threats as well as opportunities, I think. But there's a lot more opportunities, I think, to help to address prevention through these, particularly through cloud native technologies too. The era of essentially the data center, is going away, and the idea of a virtual data center brings, I think, a lot of opportunities to quickly identify issues and prevent them.
Great. Well, congratulations for not saying the word blockchain. That's well, with that, we wanted to open it up to the audience to see if we have any questions for our two industry experts up here. Don't be shy. Oh, that one right.
So, what's your recommendation if, God forbid, but you have a breach, right? There's so many companies that sometimes don't communicate to their customers on time. I think that's because of, I don't know, maybe they're shy about it, or they want to hold the threat. But what is your recommendation in case there is a threat or a breach to smaller operators? Should they communicate immediately to their customers, or retain the information as long as possible, as many do? What do you say?
I think I heard the question before you sit down. Was it what to do after a breach to communicate with your customers? Was that a summary?
More time, like, is it
I'm
quick?
sorry?
He was asking, should it be quick to respond, to tell them, or hold off and wait like others have done?
Interesting question, and we got to see everybody do it differently. I'm lucky enough that I probably heard about breaches pretty early, so I got to see companies that took a long time to respond, and then companies that responded kind of quickly. And we have opinions, both of us probably have opinions on what went better for them. I think, to me, being transparent is important. The problem with being transparent quick is sometimes you don't know what you're talking about yet. So I do feel for my peers, especially those who have franchises, because it takes time for them to even know what to say. If you are a huge company and you had a breach and maybe just one franchisee chain, you want to make sure that's the truth before you report it. So I can see why they delay. So the moment you have the truth, or what you believe to be the initial truth, I think that's when you need to communicate. But I think that's not going to be my decision in my company. That'll be a whole crisis team's decision. I'm a person that nobody's allowed to talk to during a breach. But I would definitely say the reason why you see it differently is because sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they have to understand the scope of how bad things were. You might have gotten creds on security reporting that you had a problem, and that's how you found out. You've only known for a couple days. So if you can, just understand. I think an ethical company would let you know as soon as they possibly could, but I think possibly could is scoped by the fact that they need to know the truth before they can go forward.
Charlie, anything to add?
Now, I believe that there are some regulatory guidelines too around what you have to, depending upon the nature of the breach and how large it is, and if it's credit information. There are some guidelines as to what you're obligated to do, but that's something for you to discuss with your lawyer and your insurance company, etc.
Anybody else? Oh, right over here.
Yeah, no question. I was wondering if you guys can just comment on long-term of mobile payments and how that works with PCI compliance, just that's not storing the data locally, and if you think that's a long-term solution.
Oh, PCI requirements for mobile payments. Yes.
Mobile payments for us is wonderful because we are truly isolated away from the actual true credit card information. We've been given or our provider. In our case, we're totally isolated away because we do point-to-point encryption. But our provider is isolated away from it too. So I think it's wonderful. I think it's a little hard for us in the QSR industry because our drive-throughs are our business, a big part of our business, and holding up phones at a distance is. So I'm excited about the startups over there trying to think of different things to do that we can do payments better in the drive-through. The adoption rate's not really strong in our part of the industry. I don't know what it is for everybody else. We do better with it in our mobile apps. We do have a nice turnout in our mobile apps, especially on the Apple platform. But I love it. I love it myself. I shop places purposely if they have Apple Pay. was making the choice.
Obviously, there's a tremendous benefit because you're dealing solely with tokens. So at that point, when you're storing tokens, they're only, in the case of even mobile tokens, that's just a token for that transaction. But even if you're just collecting credit card information, you can securely tokenize that data and store that without it ever touching your systems too, depending upon how you're working with your payment gateway. So obviously the technology's there to store information and do so in a way that's safe and protects both the consumer and your brand.
Right. It lowers your scope. Right.
Exactly. It doesn't
Right.
eliminate it, and it does lower your scope though and what you have to do.
How about we get time? Oh, thank you.
Go Tesco.
Hi. So you've talked a lot about hackers gaining access through local restaurants. Are there any additional threats or different challenges that you would identify for the restaurant support centers?
What was the last word?
Restaurant support centers, so
Support
like
centers.
HR department.
So obviously, you have to, whether it's consumer data, trade secrets, etc. Your employees are obviously people that you have to be aware of, and because their data can leak out that way, as well as just sometimes by accident too. It's not even a question of a sort of nefarious intent, but simply like people who use their same password for their corporate account that they use for Facebook or something like that. That you have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about corporate structures or home offices or support centers that might be around, they actually could, especially on the social engineering side, be tricked into bigger things. They are closer to our servers and networks and normally sitting on our networks with our servers. So yeah, there's a lot of risk. I think the biggest thing there, again, is it's a different kind of education. It's very similar education. I mean, good protection, but they might have special things that they can do. So accounting people, HR people have special things that they oversee that they can do both financially and about people information that they have to be really cognizant of, that people will call them, they will try to get them to do things. They may just be very innocent. So really it's about making sure that everybody's educated not to be, unfortunately, innocent anymore to that stuff. And that structure to believe that they would be pinpointed of all people. They're not the security people, they're not the president of the company, why would they have to learn this stuff? And so that's to bring them along is important.
It creates, you have to walk a line too. I mean, in the case of Dime, where we are a global organization, we have, even the people who are authorized to access systems sometimes have a hard time doing that if they're traveling overseas, because we'll shut down access from, China or Korea or wherever, so that you can't actually even get into your email. So it's you have to figure out how you're going to walk that line to protect your data. But it's because once you're connecting through, or if someone in a place like this, they can jump onto a free Wi-Fi or something that looks like an open Wi-Fi, but is somebody else who's set up a hotspot, a lot of data can be extracted that way.
We're in town with obviously Ohio State University, but also an organization, very important organization called Battelle. And they have a tremendous amount of national secrets that they have, and they will have professors that will go into a free Wi-Fi, try to get on the network, try to do things. You just don't understand. So educating people that top secret stuff can't go over public Wi-Fi seems like it would be kind of a no-brainer, but you have to do it. And the risk was they actually he was lucky because they had a group of Ohio State students that were purposely looking at what was going over the Wi-Fi for their security class and was doing a report on it and was able to report it back to the organization that he was inadvertently doing this. And they didn't do anything with the data, obviously, but somebody could have if they'd been following him around. So,
well, I think that's all the time we have. Susan and Charlie, thank you so much. Thank you to all our audience members.